If you know anything about Kingdom Hearts, it's that Sora is a boy with a key who goes around and hits things with said key. In the first game, he seals keyholes to stop the worlds from being destroyed. And in the second game, he seals keyholes to open paths that come from items. Does this mean that the items have hearts? Or that they have some vague level of sentience? Who knows? What I'm getting at is that in the first game, Sora seals 2 special keyholes at the beginning of the journey. One in Wonderland, and the other being in Deep Jungle. The reason these 2 are special is because in Wonderland you see the Keyblade forces Sora's hand in sealing the keyhole, showing that if it appearing out of thin air wasn't proof enough that it was magical, then this certainly did. The keyhole in Deep Jungle shows us something interesting. A dead, veiny green tree with neon blue butterflies covering it. Upon sealing the keyhole, we get 2 pieces of information. The first being that the heart of this world is connected to this tree, and the birth of a king. You know, that sounds vaguely similar to another tree signifying the birth of a king. Very similar indeed. Ever hear of Gondor? In the land of Middle-earth, there existed a nation called Gondor, with its people, the Gondorians, being a race of men whose national symbol resembled a dead, veiny-looking tree with 7 stars above the tree. One such star held a crown below it. This tree symbolized hope and light renewed in the rebirth of the King of Gondor that would happen sometime after the fall of the kingdom. To the elves, the 7 stars was Valasira, signifying the downfall of Morgoth, the Lord of Darkness. Much like how in Kingdom Hearts, how the 7 lights represent the downfall of Xehanort, a man tainted by darkness to do its bidding, kind of like Sauron, who was tainted by Morgoth's influence. A veiny, dead-looking tree, huh? All that sounds familiar to something else, but what could it be? Ever heard of the Ashen one? In Dark Souls 3, at the start of the journey, we come across a very similar tree. In fact, it's not only similar looking, but also a little in color. Funnily, this tree also appears at the start of the Ashen one's journey, much like Sora's, though this game's tree can resemble 2 messages at the same time: hope and light, or despair and darkness. As sad as it sounds, the hope and light path doesn't lead to the Ashen one curing the world of its abyssal corruption. No, it instead ends with you allowing the first flame, the literal light that led mankind to the surface and gave sustenance, to extinguish and sending the universe into total darkness, essentially ending all life. This all sounds like hogwash, which that word in itself sounds like a Hogwarts cleaning day, and seeing the size of that castle, I'd rather clean that than Lothric or Hollow Bastion, that's for damn sure. But all that doesn't mean anything, really. Trees exist in all media, and there's bound to be ones that look similar. There's probably a tree in your backyard. It doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, let's be real. I'd have an easier time linking the Erd tree from Elden Ring to Yggdrasil due to their one-to-one identities. It's not like there's something odd about the Ashen one that points to a link to the KH universe. Wait. If the whole story of the Ashen one is that they failed to light the fire and burned to ash, how can you be embered? Sure, your clothes are not ash revived as well, but you are. And if you take your profile that has way too much time on it for this game and go completely naked, except for the loincloth that you can't remove because this is only an ember game, you're still releasing embers into the air. There's 2 explanations for this. The first is that you're still flesh, so the embering is actually singeing flesh that is regenerating as it burns, which is a pretty metal thought to be honest. However, I prefer to think that this is just black and white stuff that comes off the bodies of organization members that die. The Ashen one is the nobody to a previous chosen undead who failed their task and burned away. This all still lines up. In Lord of the Rings, we don't really see any nobodies or heartless, but we know the void exists, so the realm of darkness exists. In Arda, the Pangea of worlds that eventually leads to Backcover and Union Cross, we don't see anybody get their heart stolen from there. We only see people straight up die, and if they ever get brought back, it's only as ghosts, a death of consciousness. And how are they still around if the consciousness died? Simple. The final world. In Kingdom Hearts, we rarely, if ever, see someone die regularly. Death of the heart and death of the consciousness are two different deaths. Death of the heart isn't complete or even permanent, as we see multiple characters get Norded or just get their hearts stolen or removed, causing a split in consciousness to make a heartless nobody. Either lose any form of consciousness, unless they just aren't strong, in which case that person becomes a shadow or a dusk. A loss of consciousness has only happened to one person we know of, and that's Terra. When he became Lingering Will, his ghost of sorts was linked to the armor directly, and when it was destroyed, the ghost returned to the Guardian who housed Terra's heart for 10 years. The way I see it, one has to die in a way that does not remove the heart, keep the heart in the body, but destroy the brain, which is what was done before the invention of magical weapons, and the only ghosts we see in Lord of the Rings are those of the Army of the Dead. Clearly not normal individuals in the slightest, and these people are also linked to the Tree of Gondor. They were linked to Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, to win the Battle of Pelennor Fields to save Minas Tirith and advance to the gates of Mordor. But Mune, some might say, this is all cool and such, but it doesn't really work because Lord of the Rings, while a story with magic in it, cannot possibly come before or after Kingdom Hearts, because Kingdom Hearts is so much more magical based and also a lot less brutal than Lord of the Rings and the world of Arda. And if you read up about the lore after the events of the movies, then you know Morgoth, the Dark Lord, was prophesied to return as well. First off, Morgoth doesn't really come back. He's still stuck in the void and he still has to whisper out to other people who are outside of the void in order to corrupt them, in order to have them do his evil bidding. But also, here's how I've come to view it. The timeline can go Lord of the Rings, Kingdom Hearts, and Dark Souls. We start at the very beginning with Arda, more specifically Middle-earth. As the events happen, we see the first, second, third, and fourth ages come and go as eventually all races become extinct due to Morgoth's influence. That's what the prophecy is about. It's about the end of Arda, in a sense, with the possible exception of the Valar. But the world is still there, and it's still one world. Millennia after millennia pass and evolution begins anew, this time leading up to the events of KH Backcover, and all the way through where KH will eventually end by 2177. The Keyblade could be a result of Valarian magic or possibly an upgrade to Enduro, as we know this to be an elven-enhanced sword, reforged after Sauron crushed it and Isildur cut off his fingers. The elves are descendants of the Valar, who are quite magically attuned, but not as much as their Maiar founders. Not too long after the KH universe starts dying, the darkness grows stronger, as those who wield the power of light begin to slowly fade away. This leads to the Keyblade wielders creating bottled life energy, a combination of water, which is an element of light, and fire, an element of darkness, that can be restored upon resting at magical bonfires in hope that the light is kept safe. Ultimately, darkness rids Keyblade wielders from the universe and begins to corrupt everything in the realm of light, causing gross creatures of the darkness, as this evolution of darkness is a lot more sinister and malicious, with the realm of darkness becoming what is now known as the Abyss, where even more horrid creatures lurk. The cursed ones continue to light the fire in hopes of a world where light will take back, but it never does, which leads to the Ashen One, cutting the flame for all eternity and ending eons of unneeded suffering and eternal imprisonment of the Dark Lord himself, finally bringing an end to this painful existence. And even if that is a little too much for you, consider the Valar, a subset of the Maiar who were so powerful that they single-handedly controlled light, fire, water. They could also take the shape of pretty much anything they wanted, trancing men and elves with their presence alone, as we see when Gandalf returns. And yes, Gandalf is a confirmed Valarian, with his Valar name being Olorin, the wisest of the Maiar, by the way. And if that wasn't enough, they created the nation of Numenor by combining their powers to raise an island from the Great Sea. A nation, mind you, that was ruled by men, mortal, fallible, greedy men, who were able to create equipment that was so strong that it not only rivals Enduril in power, but in some cases were even outclassing said blade, and Enduril was so strong that it lasted from the beginning of the Fellowship to the end of Aragorn's life, and presumably to the end of the Fourth Age as well. The Valar are not a joke. Their magic is more than powerful enough to create a weapon that can act in a way like the Keyblade. And I'm going to come out and say it now, that if this theory is true, the Master of Masters is a Maiar, specifically Valarian. He's ultra powerful apparently, he knows so much about the world when nobody else has a clue, and on top of all that, he has eyes that can see the future? Yeah, Valarian. In my theory, the Keyblade wielders created the Estus Flask as a balance of light and darkness to help future masters keep the balance. I, however, do not include the Ashen Estus into that theory. As stated before, the Ashen one is a failure who could not fulfill their duty as a Lord of Cinder and became an Unkindled, or as some NPCs put it, a Warrior of Ash. Although there isn't much lore on it, I believe the Ashen Flask to be a regular flask that got cursed, hence why it turns the fire of the bonfire cold and acts completely different. It's a chemical imbalance that turns out to be quite helpful. The reason I say it's cursed and not a previous user's burned flask is because of the shards of opaque crystal jutting off of it. When you get completely cursed in Dark Souls, it does one of two things. First being that it makes you want to kill a person in real life for the progress you just lost in the souls that you have to speedrun to, nab, and GTFO before you get cursed again. Second is it makes your character grow these shards of weird stony crystal, and you can roll into these statues afterwards when you go back to them and completely atomize them, so they're incredibly brittle as well, lending to the theory that instead of being just regular burned flask, it could be cursed because it has the same exact look as a cursed person, but it's not as brittle apparently, because I guarantee you the Ashen one does not handle that flask with the daintiest of touches. A few points I just want to mention in a kind of lightning round. I find it interesting how in Lord of the Rings, water and light are connected much like fire and darkness, which is a theme many fiction genres do, but it's more interesting in Lord of the Rings because every time I see it depicted, it's always the coolest looking thing ever. Like fire and darkness in Lord of the Rings The Third Age on PS2 is just one of the coolest kinds of elemental magic you can end up doing. It's just a shame that that game does not have a good balance of particles and effects and SFX, because that game is actually really interesting, and it's very worth checking out if you're a Lord of the Rings fan. It also has Black Speech, which is the Mordor language that Gandalf used, and in that scene in the movie in Rivendell, you can actually see whenever he speaks in the Mordor tongue, Legolas and Elrond, both elves by the way, are just like trembling. They're trying to block it out as much as they can. The dwarves are all terrified, hobbits are uneased, and men are just completely struck with fear. And Gandalf, being a Valarian, is also just like in unease because there's just absolutely, it's a creepy language and it was meant to be exactly that. As to where the Valar went after the events of Lord of the Rings, they're probably just hiding away in some faraway world in Kingdom Hearts, and as a result, some faraway land in Dark Souls. Because that's exactly what they did during the events of Lord of the Rings. They hid in the Undying Lands, and at the end of Lord of the Rings, they go to the Undying Lands. Well, you don't see them go to the Undying Lands, it was just Frodo, Gandalf, and Galadriel. And you know, if that doesn't really sit right with you, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they're just hiding again after Arda split. Another thing is, how does the world go from realistic people to cartoon characters? I don't fully have an explanation for that one, but if I were to give it my best shot, maybe it's the effect of the light being out of balance with darkness. The more light there is, the more cartoony and innocent the world seems, but the more realistic it is. That means there's more darkness influence over it. That's probably my best guess, really. It's not actually a far off belief, because if you look at Kingdom Hearts 3, the Realm of Darkness is actually one of the more realistic looking places next to the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is not quite full of darkness, but it has Davy Jones in it, who is like the manifestation of the devil, so it kind of makes sense. And another thing I wanted to mention is, there's a creature in Lord of the Rings called the Balrog. It's a really interesting beast. It's basically a demigod of sorts, and it is a fire-darkness mixed creature. And I think that the dark side is just a lesser version of the Balrog. It has more darkness than fire. It doesn't have any fire, actually. But it really makes you wonder, if this theory is true, then what's the water dark side doing? Because that's the odd one out, because that implies there's a dark side that gained the power of an element most associated with light. Kind of like how some animals and insects develop things that make them a lot less deadly looking to lure in prey. The Dark Souls version of the dark side slash Balrog would be the demons, with varying degrees of fire and darkness mixture. In Dark Souls 3, there are specifically some demons that are very much more on fire than others, and they look a lot more Balrog-y. So, if you can't link Kingdom Hearts out to any of this stuff, you can definitely make an argument for Lord of the Rings and Dark Souls being within the same universe. I don't see why not. And I think the question that's on everybody's mind, do the Valar drive cars in the Kingdom Hearts universe? And if they did, where are they in the Dark Souls universe? Well, that's a whole nother video in itself, and you'll just have to wait till next March Caprice. I'm sorry, but you're just gonna have to wait. Hey there, thank you all for watching. This is an idea I had back during August, a simple what if you would, and I didn't think it would do a super good job because I kind of started my research sometime after I signed up for March Caprice, and you know, Lord of the Rings is kind of a big thing, and so is Dark Souls. Dark Souls literally being 3 different games that have just a world of lore in their item description, and Kingdom Hearts just having so much of that kind of takeaway lore that you could really do anything with after a certain point. So in the future, maybe I'll go on to depth and make an even longer video about it after I do a lot more research. But I think this is just covering the grounds on a really interesting idea, and something that does not have, you know, it's actually possible that this could exist as an idea. I just scratched the surface on this. There's so much stuff in the Tolkien lore, in the Soulsborne lore, in the Kingdom Hearts lore that you could just look and see if it really combines the things. I just looked at a tree and came up with this entire video. I looked at a tree and this video got spawned from that. So it's like, anything is possible, really. And just in case you're wondering, if you look at the Tree of Gondor on the thumbnail, the stars are from top to bottom, left to right, in order: Sora, Riku, Kairi, Lee, Mickey, Aqua, Ventus. All of them with their own colors and styles. And I also want to thank my friend for doing that masterfully crafted Dearly Beloved mix. I think he did an amazing job, and I would love to work with him again on some other stuff. And I would like to thank one of my other friends who helped me perfect that logo, because that is just a chef's kiss logo. And I hope to partake in March Caprice next year, and I hope that maybe next time, you know, if I do end up doing a video for March Caprice, I won't lose track of time and forget that February doesn't have 30 days. You know, I hope you all have a very good March Caprice. Now, I gotta go to bed. It is pretty late. And I don't mean that because I'm like 23 and it's 2023. That still blows my mind. Like, every time a new year happens, you know, it always blows my mind. It's crazy to me. Anyways, y'all have a nice March Caprice. Alright, later.